The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod by Henry Beston. Chapter 7, An Inland Stroll in Spring. Section 2. I devoted the entire day yesterday to an adventure I have long had in mind. A walk across the Cape from outer ocean to Cape Cod Bay. As the crow flies, the distance from the forecastle to the west shore is about 4.5 miles. Afoot and by the road, it is nearer 7.5, for one must follow roads lying north of the Great Lagoon. The day was pleasant. Cool, easterly winds blew across the moors, and it was warm enough when I found both shelter and the sun. I walked to Norset Station, close along the landward edge of the dunes, out of sight and sound of the sea. All up and down these western gradients of grass and sand, the plant life of the region is pushing through the surface drifts and sandy overflowings which crept eastward during winter. Green leaves of the beach pea are thrusting up, sand crumbs still lodged in their unfolded crevices. The dune goldenrod is shouldering the bright particles aside. Against the new olive coloring of the dunes, the compact thickets of beech plume are as charred-looking as ever. But when I strolled over to a thicket, I found its buds tipped with a tiny show of green. Arriving at Norset, I found my Coast Guard neighbors airing their bedding and cleaning house. Andrew Weatherby hailed me from the tower. We shouted pleasantries and passed the time of day. Then down Norset Road I went, turning my back on ocean and a rising tide. The first mile of the road from Norset to Eastham village winds through a singular country. It is a belt of wild, rolling, and treeless sand moorland, which follows along the rim of the earth cliff for 2/3 of its length and runs inland for something like a mile. Norset Station, with its tiny floor of man-made greenery, lies at the frontier between my dune world and this sea-girt waste. Coast Guard paths and the low, serried poles of the Coast Guard telephone are the only clues to the neighborhood of man. Desolate and half-desert as it is, this borderland of the Cape has an extraordinary beauty, and for me, the double attraction of mystery and wide horizons. Just to the north of the station, the grass turns starveling and thin, and the floor of the border waste becomes a thick carpet of poverty grass, Hudsonia tomentosa, variegated with channels and starry openings of whitish sand. All winter long, this plant has been a kind of rag gray. It has had a cloth-like look and feel, but now it wears one of the rarest and loveliest greens in nature. I shall have to use the term sage green in telling of it, but the color is not so simply ticketed. It is sage green, yes, but of an unequaled richness and sable depth. All along the waste, the increasing light is transmuting the gray sand of winter to a mellowness of gray-white touched with silver. The moor blanches, the plant puts on the dark. To my mind, this wild region is at its best in twilight, for its stunned floor gathers the dark long before the sunset color has faded from the flattened sky. And one may then walk there in the peace of the earth gloom and hear from far below the great reverberation of the sea. West of this treeless waste, the Norset Road mounts to the upland floor of the Cape and to the inhabited lands. When Henry Thoreau walked through Eastham in 1849, warding off a drenching autumnal rain with its Concord umbrella, he found this region practically treeless, and the inhabitants gathering their firewood on the beach. Nowadays, people on the Outer Cape have their woodlots as well as inlanders. The tree that has rooted itself into the windswept bar is the pitch pine, Pinus rigida, the familiar tree of the outer Long Island wastes and the Jersey Barrens. Rigida has no particular interest or beauty. One writer on trees calls it rough and scraggly. Yet, let me say no harm of it, for it is of value here. It furnishes firewood, holds down the earth and sand, and shelters the plowed fields. In favorable situations, the pine reaches a height of between 40 and 50 feet. On these windy sands, trees of the oldest growth struggle to reach between 25 and 30. The trunk of this pine is brownish, with an overtone of violet, and seldom grows straight to its top. Its leaves occur in a cluster of 3, and its dry cones have a way of adhering for years to its branches. They are forever burning up, these pitch pine woods. A recent great fire in Wellfleet burned 4 days, and at one time seemed about to descend upon the town. Coast Guard crews were sent to help the villagers. Many deer, they tell me, were seen running about in the burning woods, terror-stricken by the smoke and the oncoming crackle of the crest of the flame. Encircled by the fire, one man jumped into a pond. Scarce had he plunged when he heard a plunge close by and found a deer swimming by his side. The thickets were rusty yesterday, for the tree thins out its winter-worn foliage in the spring. As I paused to study a group of particularly dead-looking trees, I scared up a large bird from the wood north of the road. It was a marsh hawk, Circus hudsonius. Out of the withered tops flew this shape of worm, living brown, flapped, sailed on, and sank in the thickets by the marsh. I was glad to see this bird and to have some hint of its residence, because a female bird of this species makes a regular daily visit to the dunes. She comes from somewhere on the mainland north of the marsh, crosses the northeast corner of the flats, and on reaching the dunes aligns her flight with the long 5 miles of the Great Wall. Down the wall she comes, this great brown bird, flying 15 or 20 feet above the awakening green. Now she hovers a second as if about to swoop. Now she sinks as if about to snatch a prey, and all the time advancing. I've seen her flutter by the west windows of the forecastle so near that I could have touched her with a stick. Apparently, she is on the watch for beach mice, though I have as yet seen no mouse tracks on the dunes. She arrives between 10 and 11 o'clock on practically all fair weather mornings, and occasionally I see her search the dunes again late in the afternoon. Circus hudsonius is a migrant, but some birds spend the winter in southern New England, and I have a notion that this female has wintered in Norset woods. Once Norset Road approaches Eastham village, the thickets of pitch pines to the eastward fall behind. The fields south of the road widen into superb treeless moorlands, rolling down to the shores of the great lagoon. Orchard tops become visible in hollows, and a few houses sit upon the moors like stranded ships. Eastham village itself, however, is not treeless, for there are shade trees near many houses and trees along the road. All trees on the outer cape are of interest to me, for they are the outermost of trees, trees with the roar of breakers in their leaves. But I find one group of especial interest. As one goes south along the main highway, one encounters a straggle of authentic western cottonwoods, Populus deltoides. The tree is rare in the northeast. Indeed, these trees are the only ones of their kind I have ever chanced to find in Massachusetts. They were planted long ago, the village declares, by Cape Codders who emigrated to Kansas, and then returned, homesick for the sea. The trees grow close by the roadside, and there is a particularly fine group at the turn of the road near Mr. Austin Cole's. In this part of the Cape, an aerial fungus paints the trunks of deciduous trees an odd mustard orange, and as I passed yesterday by the cottonwoods, I saw that the group was particularly overspread with this picturesque stain. The growth seems to do no harm of any kind. At a boulder commemorative of the men of Eastham who served in the Great War, I turned south on the main highway and presently reached the town hall and the western top of the moorland country. There, I left the road and walked east into the moors to enjoy the incomparable view of the great Eastham marshes and the dunes. Viewed from the seaward scarp of the moors, the marsh takes form as the greener floor of a great encirclement of rolling, tawny, and treeless land. From a marsh just below, the vast flat islands and winding rivers of the marsh run level to the yellow bulwark of the dunes, and at the end of the vista, the eye escapes through valleys in the wall to the cold April blue of the North Atlantic plain. The floor of ocean there seems higher than the floor of the marsh, and sailing vessels often have an air of sailing past the dunes low along the sky. A faint green colors the skyline of the dunes, and on the white flanks of the empty moorlands, stains of springtime greenness well from the old tawniness of earth. Yesterday I heard no ocean sound. So beautiful was the spacious and elemental scene that I lingered a while on the top of the moor cliff shelving to the marsh. The tide was rising in the creeks and channels, and the gulls remaining in the region had been floated off their banks and shoals. The great levels seemed, for the moment, empty of their winged and silvery life. During the winter, one bird has made this moorland region all his own, and that bird the English starling. The birds apparently spend the winter on these hills. I've crossed the open country during a northeast gale just to watch them wheeling in the snow. Scarce had one flock settled ere another was up. I saw them here and there and far away. I find these eastern birds of particular interest, for they are the first American starlings I have seen to recover their ancestral and European mode of life. In Europe, the bird is given to congregating in vast flocks. There are river lowlands in England where such starlings flock gather in crowded thousands, and once the starling army has established itself in a region, it is theirs completely and forever. Are the flocks at Eastham the beginning of one of those European mobs? Will the various flocks now inhabiting the moors ultimately mingle to form one enormous and tyrannous confederacy? The separate winter swarms already consist of 50 to 75 birds, and I imagine that if the stray members of each flock were to return to their congregations, these bands might be found to contain well over 100 individuals. Such a mingling, as I speak of, may possibly take place. Again, it may be that the resources of the region are already taxed to support the present birds. Let us hope that this last is the truth. The presence of these rabble blackbirds disturbs the entire natural economy of the region, for they strip every autumnal bush and plant bare of its last seed and berry, and leave nothing for our native birds to feed on when they return in the spring. With spring, the birds desert the moors, pair off, and retire to the village barns and the chimneys of unopened summer cottages. The hour of flood tide approaching, I left the moors behind and went to the west shore to see what I could of the strangest of all regional migrations.